Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I see our attendees are starting to sign in. While we give everyone a moment to actually get online, I'm going to ask those of you that are online joining us this afternoon, please make use of the chat function, pop us a message and let us know who you are and where you are signing in from this afternoon. This is just to actually give us a moment for all the attendees to sign in. So I'm going to ask that you just use the chat function, pop us a message with your name and where you are signing in from. We have Manika Pelay from the Eastern Cape, Tracy from Pretoria. Welcome everyone. Thank you for signing in. If you've just joined, please make use of the chat function. Just pop us a message with your name and where you are signing in from today. We have Leon Roots from UNISA in Pretoria. Welcome. Thank you for signing in this afternoon. We have Asna from Sweden. Welcome again. And we have Annie also joining us again. So I just want to mention that Asna and Annie have joined all 9 sessions, previous 9 sessions, and this is their 10th session that they are attending. So welcome. We see a few familiar faces and names. Thank you everyone for signing in. We are just allowing a few moments for the rest of the attendees to get on. And while we do that, if you've just signed on, please pop us a message with your name and where you are signing in from this afternoon. Akaweli from Ghana, welcome and thanks for signing in this afternoon. Okay, it looks like we are ready to begin. And with that being said, I would like to give everyone a warm welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today, we are in the 10th webinar session of 11 for the webinar series on GBV. It is a collaboration with Golden Key Southern Africa, UNISA, Father a Nation, SAFAIDS, and Vitality Wellness. I have the honor to introduce to you both Pastor Manika Pelay and Mr. Leon Roots from UNISA. I will start with Leon. Leon Roots is the program convener of postgraduate program of Social and Behavior Studies, HIV and AIDS, within the Department of Sociology. He is also the program manager of Teresano Collaborative Projects, focusing on the advocacy and diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusion in communities, curriculum, and workplaces. Currently, he is the convener of the university's Employee Health and Wellness Working Group and has been involved in this field in various sectors over years, including the development of workplace policy and program frameworks. His MA focused on pathways to manhood, while he is currently working on his PhD, which will present some guidelines on how to implement male-friendly employee health and wellness workplace programs. He also served as chairperson of SAFAID South Africa between 2015 until 2020 and provided strategic advice and support to different organizations in both the public and private sector on HIV, health and wellness. And then we have Pastor Manika Pelay, who is an ordained minister in the Full Gospel Church. She has been a full-time minister for the last 14 years. She has a CPSC level 5 religious professional. Manika holds a master's degree in theology, dogmatics at Northwest University. In 2017, she was awarded the Northwest University Lenti DeLonga Trophy for Best Ethics Students by the Faculty of Theology. She is currently serving as the Vice President of the Golden Key International Honor Society Alumni Committee in the Eastern Cape. Her hobbies include doing karate, mixed martial arts, singing, songwriting, and doing research. Her passion is to help individuals achieve their goals, and she loves being involved in community upliftment. Manika's motto in life is never give up. Welcome, everyone. Over to you, Manika.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you for that lovely introduction. We are so glad to be here with everyone this afternoon, and I cannot believe that we are already in the 10th session. It has been quite a journey, and we are looking forward to our session on Monday, sadly, which will be our last session for this series, but I know there's going to be a lot of fruitful networking and communication after as well. So this is not the end. We will be back. So let us enjoy our session today, because we are in the last stretch, a very, very important part of this whole project. And that is today to work towards an integrated and a multi-sector response to GBV, gender-based violence in Africa. Without further ado, I just want to introduce our Master of Ceremonies today. And then also one of the presenters before I hand over to Leon from UNISA. So from my side, from the Golden Key Southern Africa office, I just want to welcome you here this afternoon, and we welcome our MC and our presenters as well. Our MC for today is Edith Masiyofa-Tapfuma. She's a seasoned senior development social scientist and strategist with organizational track record working in international organizations in Southern Africa and international. Edith is currently lead and managing consultant for Vitality Wellness Zimbabwe, and has previously co-authored a book entitled Tales of Womanhood, Compelling Stories of Resilience and Women's Empowerment. Edith is an expert in promoting private sector sustainability, decent work, and diversity management. Edith has a strong background promoting women's economic empowerment, managing HIV and AIDS, wellness, advocacy, and policy processes, poverty reduction strategies, and gender programming for private sector, CSOs, FPOs, media, youth, and women's organizations. Edith is also a social entrepreneur with interest in empowering women and girls. And it has come to light in this webinar series how important it is to empower our women and our girls. Edith is also board chairperson for Safe Haven Zimbabwe, an organization to supporting the learning needs of children with autism and providing a parent support network. Edith is a travel enthusiast and she loves cooking for her family. And her favorite saying in Shona means, "May grace abound." Edith lives with her husband and 3 children in Harare, Zimbabwe, and we welcome you here today, Edith. It's such a privilege to have you as our Master of Ceremonies. Then for this session, one of our presenters is none other than Sipusetu Krutani, who I know personally as well. So I'm very excited to have her here as she serves with me on the Eastern Cape Alumni Committee for Golden Key. Sipusetu Krutani obtained a B-Psych counseling degree from the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University in 2016, as well as a good co-circular record of non-academic participation. She then pursued her postgraduate studies at Rhodes University, enrolled for a master's degree in clinical psychology entailing both coursework and a dissertation, titled A Correlation Analysis Investigating the Relationship Between Gender-Based Violence and Gender Role Ideology. She then graduated with a master's degree in clinical psychology in 2019. I know she's joining us from the Fort England Psychiatric Hospital, which is based in Makanda. In 2015, she launched a workshop program that focused on professional development and leadership skills offered to pupils as well as unemployed youth in Nsengi village based in Kofomvaba. Furthermore, she went on to create a platform to hold open dialogues concerning social issues such as teenage pregnancy, suicidality, and xenophobia, with the intention of bringing awareness to such issues and their impact on society. Her passions include mental health, advocacy against gender-based violence and youth, and women empowerment also. She's currently registered as a clinical psychologist with the Health Professions Council of South Africa and employed as a clinical psychologist in Fort England Hospital, based in Makanda in the Eastern Cape in South Africa. She currently serves in the portfolio of professional development in the Golden Key International Honor Society Eastern Cape Alumni Committee. I'm very proud to present to you Sipusetu Krutani. I'm now going to give over to Leon Roots from UNISA. Over to you, Leon.
Thank you, Jonita, and thank you for the space. And colleagues, yeah, it's the 10th session. A lot has happened, a lot has been shared. networks were established, and we can even feel the energy through this virtual spaces coming from you who are participating and staying with us for so many times and actually really engaging with us on these different aspects of gender-based violence as we progress through the webinars. Obviously, the recordings will be available on Golden Key, and we will send you the link that you can afterwards also get access to it. We have decided that we want to rather suggest that if you need presentations from some of the speakers, that we would rather let you engage directly with the speaker. We can make the contact details of them available so that you can then also access their presentation or negotiate with them how you can then access. The reason is in South Africa, there's a lot of things happening with issues of copyright and personal information. And we just try to manage that space a bit more. And so we feel also this is a network opportunity then for you to engage. And please, this is the platform that you must feel free to engage with any of us. We are the main ones, Golden Key, South Africa, and UNISA. But obviously with the strong collaboration with Father Nation, Fertility, Wellness that we work, and also SAF-AIDS. And obviously that means that we will continue this collaboration beyond the webinars as a team, but also we would like to then see if you feel there are areas of collaboration that you would like to explore with us. Feel free to engage with us, and we love it. Already somebody have written earlier this week to us to ask if they can have a meeting to talk about the collaboration, and we really appreciate that opportunity because that shows impact. It shows that what we do is the right thing. So on behalf of UNISA, very welcome here, and may you have a really fruitful and a meaningful engagement. Our second guest speaker for today is Manika Pelay, and I'm very privileged to know her quite for a number of years. She is a person that have worked in many spaces and have built up quite a nice reputation for dedication and very passionate about the field of HIV and AIDS, sexual reproductive health, gender-based violence, and then also a lot to do with HIV and AIDS in the higher education sector. She's a social worker by background, and she holds a master's that specializes in child and youth and social justice issues and related to the issue of well-being of his children. Her career spans over many years working in the education sector, specifically the higher education sector, where she has quite a big footprint that she have made and still keep on making. She is continuously involved in program development and implementation, like she's currently the National Technical Specialist for the Department of Basic Education, focusing on adolescent girls and young women. And then she has been the steer of developing the higher education, that's our universities and colleges framework for gender-based violence as a kind of an integrated response for us as a sector to work together, which is also in line with our national plan in South Africa that address issues of gender-based violence. She is passionate about her work, and I can testify to that whenever you ask her to help with something, she's really eager to step in and come in and assist like she's doing today. She's been an activist of heart and always stood up for people in the marginalized spaces, including people with HIV, but also people affected by gender-based violence. And she always takes any day as a kind of an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. And then at the end of the day, she's also at the end of the day a mother of 2 children and a husband, and her 2 children are now in a space to also get into the world. Her daughter is finishing with UCT, and going into the global space. And then her son is now running the final spaces of his schooling. And yeah, and she's very passionate and loving a person in that space, which I can also say I've seen. So those are just a brief introduction to Manika. I think we can hand over now to Edith to take us through the whole process. Thank you, Edith.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that, Leon, and welcome to everyone joining us for this 10th of our 11 GBV series with UNISA and Golden Key. I would like now to introduce you to Professor Nokuthula Mazibuko, who is one of our speakers for this afternoon. Professor Nokuthula obtained her PhD in sociology with UNISA and a Master of Arts in Social Sciences and Development through the KZN, and also has an honors in Social Sciences and Development Studies, UDW, as well as a Bachelor of Arts from UDW, and has over 18 years working experience working in academia. Professor Mazibuko is currently the head of the University of South Africa, UNISA, Institute of Gender Studies, housed in the College of Human Sciences. The institute itself focuses on major pillars of academia, such as teaching and learning, research, academic citizenship, and community engagement. Professor Mazibuko is also the editor-in-chief for the journal Gender Questions, which is accredited by the Department of Higher Education and Training. The journal hosts special issues and normal volumes that focus on interdisciplinary as well as transdisciplinary research with the aim of advancing gender transformation on the African continent and globally. Apart from publishing scholarly articles in accredited international as well as national journals, Professor Mazibuko also participates in television and radio interviews in the Pretoria News, Facebook lecture, and publishes in various national newspaper articles. Good afternoon and welcome, Professor Nokuthula. If I can just hand over to you to lead us in your presentation and discussion for this afternoon.
I think we're going to hand over to one of our presenters. Who would like to be first, Setu or Manika? Setu, thank you. Let's start with Setu, Leon, and then we'll go over to Manika, and then Prof. Noku will assist and panel.
We can see it now.
Awesome. So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody. I'm really humbled. I must say, Leon didn't warn me about this audience and, you know, colleagues that I'm going to keep company with today. I'm really humbled to be able to share some of my thoughts with you. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I think as Leon said, you know, the issue of gender-based violence has been really close to my heart for many, many years, both in my career and personally just trying to, you know, make a difference in the space. And really the presentation is just to kind of stimulate the discussion and to share some thoughts with everybody, you know, around the issue of collective responsibilities. So in terms of my presentation, I just kind of want to talk a little bit about the statistics. And I hear that this is your 10th dialogue or discussion. So I'm sure that I'm enforcing some of the issues that you've already spoken about. So please bear with me. Spread and pervasive in South Africa. It certainly impacts all aspects of life. And we know that, unfortunately, women are disproportionately affected. The burden is twofold. which is very an important thing to keep in mind, that not only are women victims, but also that violence has a ripple effect on family and particularly children. I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that gender-based violence is a deeply complex social issue and challenge. We also need to keep in mind that, accurate statistics is a gap in South Africa. And many of us know that this is really due to the lack of reporting, and reporting remains a key issue. Although we do know that population-based surveys in our country certainly reveal high rates of gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and non-partner violence. We know that intimate partner violence is perhaps the most common form of violence against women, and that there are also high levels of violence against women and children, with men being perpetrators. I do want to acknowledge that men are also subject to violence, but I think our statistics are certainly pointing to the direction of proportionality, and we need to keep that in mind. What we know, just in terms of some of the statistics, we know that 51% of the total South African population are female, which equates to about 59.6 million. We know that women have higher unemployment rates, and hence are subjected to higher levels of poverty. And we know, sadly, that this is particularly common amongst the Black African women. We also know that 4 out of 10 young women fall within the NEET category, which are young women that have never been in employment, education, and training. And we also know that women are more disadvantaged than males, hence the high levels of vulnerability, low social value, and power is prevalent within this cohort of the population. So then what do we know? If we have to take all of this and layer it within the patriarchal society that we live in, we know that there are unequal power relations between men and women. We know that there are systemic roles and expectations of women in relation to tradition, culture, and institutional arrangements. And how does that play out? If you look at the 2020 Global Peace Index, South Africa was ranked 123 out of 163, noting that issues of safety and security was an issue, with its murder rates being the 6th highest in the world and the 2nd highest in sub-Saharan Africa. The 2019-2020 annual crime statistics released by the South African Police Services also indicated that there was a 1.4% increase on murder rates, with more than 21,325 cases reported. And again, just to make the case that these are only reported cases, and we know that it reflects a steady increase in contact crime, which includes sexual offenses. And I think the point to make here is that there is certainly a clear evidence, and I think all of us have seen it within our spaces, the impact of COVID and the lockdown and the implication of confining people to closed spaces. I thought the slide was just a very important slide. In fact, the slide, I pulled it out of the learner pregnancy or the teenage pregnancy presentation that we made to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee looking at adolescent girls and young women. And I think it's a very telling slide. And it's basically, again, reinforces the notion that South Africa has one of the highest rates of violence against women and girls globally. And these are more recent statistics, which talks, to the 20,170, I beg your pardon, cases of contact crimes and sexual offenses, and to make the point that 64,418 were against children. Femicide is 5 times the global average, and we recorded about 2,695 counts of murder against women in 2019-2020. There has been an exponential increase, as I said, the DSD Government Command Center recorded 120 cases in the first 3 weeks of lockdown. And these were cases of sexual assault and rape, which almost tripled, the pre-lockdown rates. And then, of course, just to make the point that we are actually dealing with the second epidemic, and if you look at the numbers that's just recorded there, it's just to make that point. So this slide is perhaps, an important slide for me, and it really talks to the multisectoral discussion that we want to have today. And I tried to pull out some of the kind of significant issues and the complexities that are related to gender-based violence. And if we look at it, the impact of GBV, the first is looking at the South African healthcare facilities. It is estimated that 1.75 million people annually seek healthcare for injuries resulting from violence. That's a staggering number. In terms of HIV, an estimated 16% of all HIV infections in women could have been prevented if women did not experience domestic violence from their partners. Men who have been raped have a long-term increase of acquiring HIV and are at risk of alcohol abuse, depression, and suicide. Reproductive health, women who have been raped are at risk of unwanted pregnancy, HIV, and other transmitted infections. And I think that, the ramifications of that are fairly clear. And then, of course, the issue of mental health. And I think we've seen it very starkly, not only in South Africa, but in Southern Africa, the impact of COVID amongst other issues, in terms of mental health. And we know that a third of women who have been raped develop post-traumatic stress disorder. And if untreated, this does persist in long-term depression. Suicide tendencies, substance abuse are very common. And as I indicated, men who have been raped are very susceptible to alcohol abuse, depression, and suicide. We also know that violence has severe economic consequences. High rate of gender-based violence places a burden not only on the health system, but also the criminal justice system, as well as rendering many survivors unable to work or otherwise move freely in society. And this just pulls out some of the KPMG statistics, which many of you might have seen in their 2014 study, that when you're looking at violence against women, the cost to the South African economy is a minimum between 28.4 billion to 42.4 billion, or between 0.9 to or 1.3% of the GDP in the country. And again, these are just, these are all statistics. So you can, just imagine what it looks like currently, particularly when compounded with COVID, and the earning capacity of breadwinners within the household. So I suppose in moving to the response strategy, what is it really saying to us? It's saying to us that we need to recognize the complexity of the issue. I think that any approach needs to be multifaceted, and that, when addressing gender-based violence, we need to certainly look at prevention work. And that speaks to, how do we prevent, how do we change the narrative in our society? And very importantly, a response that speaks to how do we support and help survivors? And sadly, I think one and the other is often forgotten in some of the responses, that you see within our spaces. And of course, we need to understand that there are deep systemic drivers, of gender-based violence. It is pervasive, and it then becomes extremely important for us to be able to understand what are the underlying causes of gender-based violence. In terms of the response strategy in South Africa, I think we really are sitting at an exciting point at the moment. South Africa has certainly made huge strides. But interestingly, the strides that were made could really be, given to the activism and calls from women and civil society to actually stand up and say, you know what, we cannot leave this unattended to. It is not business as usual. And many of us then participated in the August Women's Day 2018 march, which saw an extensive mass of women march for their voices to be heard across the country. That resulted in a first ever presidential summit in November of the same year. And this was actually a landmark summit. And this saw various post-summit commitments. And one of it is the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. And I think I just kind of made the point here that it actually represents South Africa's multi-sectoral framework to realize a South Africa that's free from gender-based violence and femicide, but more importantly, to give women a voice. And I think, you know, I want to underscore the fact that it is indeed a multi-sectoral framework, and it certainly speaks to the complexities of what we're dealing with and what I tried to tease out a little bit for you in terms of responses. And I must say, you know, being involved in the march, being involved in the presidential summit and participating in the education technical task team, it was really a momentous occasion because it really represented a multi-sectoral space. I mean, you know, there were people, there were all of us from so many different corners of the world, of the country, that came together to have their voices heard. So I'm really, you know, underscoring the fact that, you know, this can't be done without a coordinated multi-sectoral response. Just to give you a sense, I'm not sure if you've already covered this, but this really is just a quick, you know, overview of the National Strategic Plan. And, you know, you will see there the different pillars that it speaks to. It talks about accountability, coordination, and leadership, prevention, rebuilding social cohesion, justice, safety, protection, response, care, support, and healing, economic power, and then research and information management. And I think this is, then for me, the no-brainer in terms of saying that this response doesn't sit with any one sector or department or entity. I mean, I think the 6 pillars here gives a very clear indication of how important the multi-sectoral response is. This again just, you know, kind of reinforces the whole notion of the cohesive nature, the collective nature of the response, you know, and it kind of just gives you a pictorial sense of how complex and, you know, integrated the response is as well. Again, just, you know, I'm not going to go through this. I think it's really just to give you a sense of what the framework wants to achieve. But I want to just spend the last few minutes of my presentation just quickly sharing with you my experience within the higher education space, which I think was the core brief for today. And I think I just want to kind of make the point that, you know, we cannot ignore the fact that universities and colleges are microcosms of society that we live in, and certainly mirrors the complexities. Universities and colleges should be prepared to assist staff and students who experience gender-based violence even before attending university and college. I think that there is an inherent responsibility to be able to deal with students and staff that come into the university and college spaces with post-traumatic stress. We know that staff and students may experience gender-based violence on campus and as well as off campus. And we also know that violence is sadly perpetrated by staff, other students, and then as well as strangers, family, and community members. A critical point, because it actually makes the point to the university and the college that you need to look beyond your borders, you know, and it's again the multi-sectoral kind of response coming to play. Universities and colleges can run programs for staff and students that prevent GBV, and prevention and creating awareness through programming is thus critical. So what is the problem with the universities and the colleges? And these were just some of the, initial things that we were engaging with. And I really just brought it into the space because I was hoping that it would stimulate the discussion once the panel is done with inputs. And just to make the point that GBV has been a long-standing problem, within universities and colleges. And I think many of us would know the responses are very episode linked rather than sustained intervention. It's often a response to scandal and protest, as opposed to very deliberate and directed programming. We also know that responses are either altogether absent or under-resourced and inadequate and lacking in authority. We noted that as a problem, in DHEAD policy for over 20 years, there has been no concrete changes. That has resulted even from the episodic protest action that one has seen over the years. And there's been a lack of implementation and accountability. And we know that, institutions and colleges are certainly, unequal and diverse. And it becomes very important to keep in mind that a one-size-fits-all is inappropriate. And of course, we're dealing with the TVET colleges where the situation is generally unknown. So we kind of started looking at the question, how do we ensure that the current initiative does not repeat the same patterns? Let's just give you a sense of some of the complexities of the issues, in terms of what universities and colleges need to deal with. And I really just wanted to include the slide. Again, I think it talks about how complex the issue is. It's so multifaceted, and there's no way that, some of these issues can be dealt with without a multi-sectoral approach. Scope of the policy framework, again, I just kind of included the slide, and to make the point here that I think it's important to keep in mind the issue of third party and jurisdiction, because one of the issues that came to bear here when we were doing the preliminary work is that if somebody is raped, sexually assaulted by a perpetrator that's outside of the university space, the university does not have jurisdiction over that person. Obviously, they can ask the student or the staff member to go and, look at the criminal justice system, lay a charge, and again, I wanted to make this point because the multi-sectoral nature of the work, becomes critical, because again, you need to be able to have a process that allows student or staff member that's been raped or victimized to be able to have recourse, to services. And, often the university would throw their hands up and say, well, it's not our jurisdiction. We can refer to the police and let it be. So I think, it was really just to make that point. And also the issue of sexual harassment experienced during practical training, particularly with our medical students, education students, social work and psychology students that are doing practical training outside, and what are the accountability mechanisms? And again, I think this makes the point that issues are so complex and we need to look at the multi-sectoral, implications. So this was the slide that I actually just did now, before we could start the session, because I felt that, we can certainly share the gender-based violence, policy framework. So I, took out all of those slides that doubled with what it is, because I think we can really share that very quickly. We can also share the National Strategic Plan in South Africa, both of which are very important documents. I think the point that I do want to make is that the higher education sector was lucky in the sense that it did drag its feet a little bit in getting the policy framework promulgated and done. But the default benefit was that it was now developed on the back of the country, developments. So the National Strategic Plan for Gender-Based Violence was already in place. And the higher education policy framework was then finalized towards, I think, the middle of last year, which was actually a good thing, because I think the country strategy then really gave a strong foundation in terms of some of the complex issues of gender-based violence and how it was how it needed to be addressed and how we would change the narrative. So again, just to say to the audience that we can certainly share those documents. So I thought this slide was perhaps more important, to generate some of the dialogue that we want to have in this session today. And so I thought, let me kind of reflect a little on the process, of developing the policy framework. And this was a lot of, the work that I was involved in before I left the higher education space. So some of the things, that kind of struck me was that, like with HIV, we need to accept that gender-based violence was not a strategic priority in the teaching and learning space. So a lot of advocacy work was actually key. Sitting with the vice chancellors, making them understand that universities and colleges are indeed a microcosm of our societies, and we can't approach our students with blinkers. I think what we needed to do was to look outside before we looked in. We certainly have the academic brilliance, the theorizing, the research, but what we needed to do as the sector was to bring in the expertise, and that was certainly multi-sectoral in nature. Then went about setting up a technical task team that brought in members and stakeholders from various different sectors. And I do argue that that is perhaps one of the reasons of its success. We certainly needed to understand the realities on the ground. We needed to move beyond the pity party. I know I say that a little bit facetiously, but you would get leadership that would say, "Ah, shame, she's been raped, ah, shame," and I think that was for me perhaps, one of the most disrespectful approaches, or disrespectful responses that I encountered during the consultations. And I think also to address the narrative that student life, students bring these issues upon themselves, and that was kind of the narrative that prevailed. But I think the issue was, in fact, we needed to accept that these were real issues. We live in a country that normalizes the impunity with which men violate, and that's the crux of it. We needed to internalize that we actually didn't have all the answers given the complexities as the higher education sector. I think importantly, we needed to also accept that while we could leverage the successes of the HIV approach, which took us a good few, I think almost Leon would attest to this, almost 17 years, to kind of get the HIV program and policy and strategy and program approaches where it is today. So yes, we could certainly leverage on that success and lessons learned, but we needed to do something different. We couldn't take gender-based violence and lump it with HIV and say, we're going to do justice to it. I think in terms of intersectionalities, yes, but even within the space of intersectionalities, the complexities become so clear that we needed to understand that we needed two different responses and approaches. We were accountable to the students, and I think this was a big thing. The Rhodes debacle, we had a very glib response to it. I mean, we had the Rhodes students releasing the perpetrators list, and the minister, I think the minister at the time and the head of the HIV program, went into Rhodes University, called the students into the hall and said, "We can sort this, we can sort this thing out." And within 5 minutes of, the event almost trying to start up, the students said, no ways. And they actually literally walked the minister, and the leadership, including the vice chancellor, out of the hall and refused to engage. And that alone is a testament of how sensitive the issue is, how we need to appreciate the complexities. And I think the point that I also want to make is that by virtue of the fact that you are a vice chancellor, by virtue of the fact that you are a CEO of a company, dealing with health and wellness issues does not mean that you are an expert, in terms of GBV. And I think that for me underscores the issue of multi-sectoral, kind of responses. And we certainly, realized in the process that we needed to leverage key stakeholders internally, externally. We needed to bring government in. We needed to look at society, civil society, and we certainly needed to, bring in the development partners to help us. So I think, if you were to ask me, this is perhaps the most important slide in my presentation. I go on to just make the point that given the drivers that influence gender-based violence, a multi-sectoral approach is not negotiable. There are particular responsibilities that lie with the sectors that I have tried to list there, and it certainly needs robust collaboration with civil society, communities, parents, religious leaders, and other relevant stakeholders. My last 2 points are perhaps the most important, and that is, let's not pat ourselves on the back and say we have the policy framework. The policy framework is not an end in itself. And I want to conclude by saying that perhaps implementation will then be the true test. And yes, of course, my favorite saying by Kofi Annan, violence against women is perhaps the most shameful human rights violation and is perhaps the most pervasive. It knows no boundaries of geography, culture, or wealth. As long as it continues, we cannot claim to be making real progress towards equality, development, and peace. I thank you.
As it was mentioned, I work as a clinical psychologist at Fort England Psychiatric Hospital. And so I'm just going to speak from the point of the Department of Health, the mental health facility that I'm working on, and what we're currently experiencing in relation to gender-based violence. So I'm just going to start off from my research as when I was still studying at Rhodes University. So I studied clinical psychology, and my research was focusing on the relationship, the correlation between gender-based violence and gender role ideology. So what that meant is we were trying to find out if what children are taught at home, the gender role ideology, whether that influences gender-based violence in any way. So the research was targeted towards the university. The sample was university students, it was the academic staff and the support staff of the university. So now what we found was that there definitely is a clear relationship between gender-based violence and gender role ideology. What gender role ideology means is things that we have learned with regards to gender. So how we are socialized in relation to gender, and we know socialization begins quite early. The moment someone finds out they're pregnant, is it a girl or a boy? And then the decision to either buy pink or to buy blue, it all starts there. And how we speak to our girl children and how we speak to our boy children in relation to their gender is quite significant. So now what we found out with our sample, which was the academic staff, the students, and the support staff, was that definitely what people learned about gender while they were growing up when they were children still plays an important role on their attitudes today with regards to gender-based violence. So some people have observed in their own homes that the father is the head of the household and what he says goes. And sometimes fathers will use a more stern approach in terms of discipline. What does this mean for boy children who then observe this behavior from their fathers? And then that spirals into boy children and how they behave at school. Now at school, boy children are stern and they are forceful towards girl children because they've learned that this is how you relate to girls. This now spills over to our current society, the way men speak to women, the way men see women, and it all comes down from socialization, what they were taught. So when it comes to understanding GBV, it's important that we understand that role of socialization. We understand those gender role ideologies. What are we teaching our children? And the school is a very important place where it's a very important place where socialization takes place. So at home, there's a lot of socialization, but the school plays an important role in terms of sometimes changing what was taught in the home. So the Department of Education then plays a significant role in the development of individuals as a whole. So sometimes some children are not privileged to grow up in households where they are taught healthy ways of relating with other genders. But when they come into the school, the teachers then teach them how to actually relate. So the Department of Education plays a significant role, more so in our society in South Africa, where we see that the home environment is degrading, and we see parents becoming more and more addicted to substances, and there's less parental involvement from the home. And it's a lot of responsibility for the school, and I understand that, but it's a very important place. And that will, I'll speak more to that when I get to my recommendations. So now working in this mental health institution. So I work in a forensic institution. So we do a lot of forensic assessments. So the courts will send people who have perpetrated crimes into Fort England Hospital for a forensic assessment. So those are people who were suspected by the court that they might not have the capacity to, they're not fit in terms of being able to speak for themselves in the court for whatever reason. And so they're sent into the forensic system. So we see those individuals and we observe them to see, are they fit to stand trial? Did they have the mental capacity at the time? What was going on? So now what we've realized in the hospital is that we're getting so many of these cases, and most of them are in relation to gender-based violence. So these perpetrators, the mostly men, because most of the population we get from the court is men, and we only get a few females here and there. So what we noticed is that so many of them, it's either they've murdered a woman, they've raped a child, they've beaten their mothers, they have assaulted a woman. So there's so much about gender-based violence that is coming through our gates now here at Fort England Hospital. And what this also then brings awareness to is the fact that there's the gender roles, the gender role ideology that is associated with all of that, that these people have learned a certain way of relating to women. And now this is now spilling over to the mental health institutions, and the government is now having to pay so much money because we're having so many people come in through the forensic system. And then just to speak to the perpetrators again, I know because of the nature of GBV crimes, we always focused on the victims, and yes, we should be, but then there's the other side of the perpetrators. So now I'm speaking from the side of the perpetrators. So we're noticing that, the people who commit these atrocious crimes also then tend to get perpetrator trauma. There's something we call perpetrator trauma. So this is a participation-induced traumatic experience. And so these people now tend to stay more in our mental health institution because now they're dealing with the trauma, they're depressed because of what they had done, the atrocious crimes that committed outside. So GBV is playing such a significant role. And some of the cases we see, we're like, if this person had been raised in a different way, that they might have never committed this offense. And because they felt that they were disrespected by their mother, And this meant now that my mother does not recognize me as a man, and then they tend to assault their mothers. So there's so much happening in our society in relation to gender-based violence and what we're seeing in the mental health sector. And also, of course, as Manika had explained about victims falling into substance use, the depression that follows, the PTSD, we cannot say, I can't minimize that at all, but just to say that we have to understand that the mental health sector is now experiencing pressure for both victims as well as perpetrators. Now we are responsible for healing both the victims as well as the perpetrators. So the scourge of GBV doesn't just end at the offense or what was happening, but now the Department of Health is experiencing a lot of need. But now this need is mainly with regards to gender-based violence. So there's this influx on the forensic system that I had mentioned in relation to gender-based violence. So my opinion on what we need to do going forward is that we must apply laser focus on psychoeducation in relation to gender role ideology. The same way we advocate against HIV and TB. I mean, we see posters everywhere. We should start seeing more posters everywhere. Posters in the schools, in the classrooms, as early as grade 3, that we should have these things, these posters and the advocacy against these atrocious crimes and advocacy that brings awareness to gender role ideology at a very early age, because people always say, what can we do about this community? There's such a, where do we go? Like, how do we teach people who are now 40 years old how to treat women? Yes, there's definitely advocacy that is clearly targeted towards those people, which is on radio, on TV, and so on. But now our focus definitely needs to be on the younger ones, because what we're noticing is that we're getting 21-year-old males, 19-year-old males coming into this forensic system, and it is in relation to gender-based violence. So there's something that we need to then intervene with at the lower levels of the education system. So that's how I conclude my presentation.
Thank you so much for that, Situ. And it's interesting that you bring in an interesting dimension, that we spend so much time focusing on the survivor and how we can support the victims and survivors, but very few people really focus on the perpetrator and what is the impact on the perpetrator and also impact on the community. So very interesting. We will get more into that in the discussion. Now we will just ask Prof. Nekutula to also input into the discussion. Prof, what are your thoughts on GBV and strategies for implementing zero tolerance in the various spaces? Thank you.
Thank you, Edith, and thank you to our speakers, Manika as well as Setu. I've made a few points that I felt that both discussions are so critical for today's living under the circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic, that yes, of course, we have been living with a pandemic called gender-based violence for many years. And I like the argument that Setu is making, which is a reflection from her studies, that all of these instigators, or the behavior that we are seeing, is whereby at homes children have been socialized in different ways, through observation, through social learning, And then that goes way to the schooling system, that already they have been injected with the patriarchal system, that the man is the head of the family, the father's role, and the values that women have are non-existent. So looking at the pandemic, which many cases, there are families right now who have lost their loved ones. There are families right now who have lost employment due to the pandemic of COVID-19. And we in South Africa have our own history of normalizing violence. And we also have a history of being reactional when it comes to these problems we put in place, and we don't learn from the mistakes of the past, so that we best prepare for the future. I would like to say that the role of universities are as important as the last slide that Manika had, where she spoke about the responsibilities, the multi-sectoral approach, which should not be negotiable, looking at Department of Basic Education, which Setu also narrated earlier, that some of these roles that children have learned from home are being relearned and emphasized in the school. And I like that you've mentioned the need to have Department of Health, because gender-based violence seems to also tap into the pocket of billions of rands being used towards it when people find themselves being injured due to gender-based violence. And the role of social development, the role of Department of Women, Justice as well, where Setu's Setu's earlier presentation was looking specifically to the perpetrators, which I must say that I am critically very interested in that, because yes, there has been a lot of emphasis on victim approach to assist, but perpetrators, the perpetrator trauma, as well as their living and what led to these crimes. There hasn't been, or we've just blinded them as, oh, they must have learned it from their homes or their societies or their culture or their religion and so on. So to me, it is very important that we as a society stop being reactional, and we as a society consider having these discussions with our children in our homes of gender equality, and also with the Department of Education to emphasize or lessons or subjects or courses that speak of gender equality, so that we tend to see each other as humanity, and not because of our genders. We don't see each other because of our genders. We don't see each other because of our race. We don't see each other because of our sex, our culture and ethnicity. So it is very important that the Department of Basic Education introduce before it brings about initiatives that would seem to be reactional, but introduce. There were discussions years ago with the same minister to consider having a course that looks into gender equality, not to be part of the orientation life science, but to be standalone so that people understand this behavior and what not to do. And also universities to implement some kind of incentives for men who opt to involve themselves with gender studies or gender mainstreaming studies that would, erode this pandemic, which is gender-based violence. So I thoroughly thought of the ways that all the sectors can involve, and Manika also introduced the Department of Justice. We as people, we observe, and we have seen that many of these perpetrators of violence have been mostly men. And we have seen that in terms of the sentencing, we might say that we might just give a biased approach and say some of the sentences have been lenient towards perpetrators because they could only be viewed as first offenders in the sense that they've committed a murder for the first time and therefore receive a sentence of 20 years and above. So, and probably spent 15, 18 years in prison and out on good behavior. So people have seen and observed this as a consequence of taking a life, and probably the police service also, where even the investigation that seemed to have happened there may also play a role in the time or the sentences that perpetrators receive. So it is, all of these are important departments, but also universities need to be involved as role players. Families need to be involved as role players. Church, religion needs to be involved as role players in making sure that we don't continue to normalize violence. We tend to and think that each and any one of us can be a victim or a perpetrator at any moment if these are not implemented, what all these sectors have suggest they need to implement, if these are not taken care of today. And with this COVID-19, we are seeing an increase and a destruction in different families, different settings of families. Today, we've known of families which are led by children, and now there's a very increase of single parent families due to the death of COVID-19 pandemic. So we need to seriously, I always say, we discuss, and sometimes, discussion, if you hear that you're not being heard, the students at Rhodes who did that demonstration and walked out, the ministers and the vice chancellor, because sometimes, talking is enough. Action is what we conquer. Thank you. Edith?
Chair, may I just point to the fact that Ngoni has in fact also joined the session if you want to direct any questions to him. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, okay, thank you, Ngoni, and welcome. Ngoni, do you have some comments to input into the discussion?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, Edith. We really appreciate this as surface. My comment, I think the professor highlighted what I wanted to say, like I indicated, I think on Monday, to say, no one of us is as strong as all of us together. We really need a multi-sectorial approach to address the problem of gender-based violence. My sort of key action points that I noted down as I was listening to our speakers. So I identified three key issues that I also want to share, Chair, if you may allow me. The three things, the first one is advocacy. I think you Chair, you mentioned the issue of zero tolerance on all forms of gender-based violence. So I noted advocacy as a key issue that we can push forward from a civil society perspective, looking at campaigns, raising awareness, engaging communities, especially leaders, schools, in order to address the problem of gender-based violence. The second point on action is partnerships. It's about supporting community partnerships in order for us to have that social transformation at local level, so that we promote equitable gender relationships and also address the problem of gender-based violence. And the last point is that I also picked as our presenters presenting is the issue of capacity enhancement. How do we then push for resources allocation so that at least we have the capacity within our communities for social transformation and also social inclusion. Thank you, Chair.
For that, Ngoni, and then maybe if I can also just contribute a little bit to the multi-sectoral response to address GBV. My take is that when we look at, so far we focus mostly on the survivor and impact on families and communities. And today I think was the first time that we also brought in impact on the perpetrator and potential trauma that the perpetrator experiences. Their mental health is also affected, and then they also potentially face loss of income, especially if the job status is affected. And then sometimes they may even face imprisonment. This is in the case of rape. And in the communities, that individual also faces discrimination and humiliation, which extends to beyond just the perpetrator, but also the same stigma and humiliation is also felt by their family. And those are some of the things that now we need to look at maybe impacts on broader society and say, what is it or what can be done to support families at community level who've experienced such traumatic experiences or consequences because their relation is a perpetrator. And then also some impacts that we've looked at in the past. We've looked at the survivor, where we've said sometimes the survivor may end up having an abortion. Sometimes it's not really a legal abortion. It might be a backstreet abortion. And there is need for us to look at how we can also rope in service providers at community level, especially those for sexual and reproductive health services, so that we get them to support as we start to see an increase in STIs, which may also include HIV, but also an increase in the incidence of even suicide and backstreet abortions. So there is need to have that supported community level. There's also need to have an increase in family therapy and family support, as there is likely also to be an increase in family breakdowns, divorce, as all this violence is being exposed, and really to have programs at community level that are targeting the rehabilitation as well as psychotherapy for all the communities, for the survivors, for family members, as well as the perpetrators, with a view to integrate them back into society and communities. So I see a role there for general psychosocial support for the churches, and also providing counseling and support and forgiveness messages, and for family therapy, as well as increased sexual and reproductive health services, which are offered at community levels. In support of the broader responses that you get in other sectors. I've already spoken to maybe the private sectors having a structured response, which addresses both the behavioral and policy issues within the workplaces. But also, in addition to that, more has to be done in recognition that the impact and effects are going to be felt beyond the workplace. That even it's not as simple as measures being taken within a workplace and maybe somebody's job contract is terminated. It doesn't end there. Where does this individual go, and how can they be supported? What is the state of their mental health when they committed the offense and post that offense, and how can they be rehabilitated to realize why this was wrong? So this is all part of the extended message of how we can have communities that are tolerant and that have people that are not prone to violence and abuse. And then also to have advocacy messages that look at everybody at community level to say, even if most of us or most people that you will see in communities, they are not perpetrators, but most of them can be bystanders, or they have witnessed or know of people that have been violated, but they have done nothing about it. So also for those individuals to know that their silence in a way is also promoting perpetrators to continue. So we need to have that kind of education and awareness across all levels. Thank you. And I will maybe refer back now to Anita if you have a few questions or comments.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to give a comment that we do have information coming through in the chat function, which you are welcome to attend to. We do not have to end at exactly 2:30, we have confirmed. So you are welcome. I see there are comments from Shirley and there are comments from Anne. Just from my side, I agree with Manika that the policy framework process is not an end in itself. Absolutely. It doesn't mean anything if we don't go over to action. So I agree completely that we have to put these processes in place. And then with SETU, absolutely. We have to have a humanistic approach. We have to look at the victim as well as the perpetrator. All of those sections are hurt people that are in need of psychological assessments and assistance and counseling. And I think in the psychiatric hospital where she is working with them, it gives another view, it gives another perspective of the fact that the perpetrators were also subjected to trauma up to the point where they actually became perpetrators. What I enjoyed about what Ngoni said is that, the behavior that are seen in homes that said to we should stop. Professor Nokutula said we should stop being reactional, and when Ngoni spoke, I just realized once again that we have to, as a community, work together. We have to take hands, and that's why it's been so refreshing to see that the networking is taking place. So thank you, Prof. Nokutula, as well. I think what I took from what you were saying is the most important sentence here that I wrote down is that as a society we have to stop being reactional. We have to look at it from an objective point of view. So to all the presenters and the panelists, and Ngoni, thank you for bringing it under our attention. And that is something that has been very important. It's very valuable for us to realize, and I know Leon will also agree with me, is that this has come to a point where when we formulate sectoral responses, it has to be from us. We have to take hands with, and that's why the panel is so lovely, because it's from different viewpoints, different backgrounds, different strategies that are being employed, because we are talking about a multi-sectoral response. We cannot try to attempt this only from one avenue. So, Chair, I hand back over to you. If you would like to please engage with the attendees and the comments in the chats, that would be lovely. Thank you. We are not limited to ending at 2:30. I will indicate when the time does run out, so you're welcome. We want to enter into dialogue with the attendees as well. Thank you, Chair, and over to you.
Thank you, Anita. For now, I will open up to the participants. If there is anyone who has a question or comment, please just unmute yourself and you can turn on your mic and you can address if it's a general comment or you have a specific question for Setu or Managa. Was the hand up?
Let's see, Chair, let's see if we have any hands up at the moment. We have Edith, your hand is up. Let me just check with the attendees. Is there anyone in the attendee space that would like to make a comment? I do see that there are comments in the chat function, Chair. If you'd like to attend to those, there's a comment from Shirley as well as Anne. Yes, so you're welcome to, and any of the panelists.
Okay, the mostly thank you for the presentations. That's from Shirley, and yeah. There's not many questions or comments there. Yeah. Any questions, comments, or anything else to add?
I think.
Prof, yes, Prof.
Yes, I'm saying, with all that we are trying to do in our individual spaces and private spaces, how exactly do we tackle the issue of unequal power relations? I'm asking this because many families right now are going through unexpected tragedies, unexpected unemployment, unexpected living arrangements. But how exactly are we planning, or how should we tackle the unequal power relations that are going to be enhanced by this pandemic called COVID-19? It's just a question that I have in mind.
Thank you, Prof. I'm not going to refer this to the panelists, but first I'm going to throw it back to the participants, to the audience this afternoon. An excellent question from Prof. And because in the discussions that we've been having to date, we have realized that GBV is about power and authority, really abuse of that power and authority, and unequal power relations in whatever sector that we are looking at. In terms of seeking a redress, maybe we can also hear from the participants. What do you think needs to be done in order for us to try and close that gap or minimize the gaps in unequal power relations? So you can speak from whatever sector, whether it's education, tertiary, private sector or public sector. What do you think can be done to try and close that gap or to make relations more equal or more equitable?
I would wish to hear from our participants, the ones who are, entering the space of work, starting families, how exactly, are we planning to tackle the issue of power, unequal power relations, the unexpected unequal power relations that we're experiencing.
As we're giving the attendees time to respond, I just want to ask for them to please put their answer in the chat function, and then our chair will just read it out and engage. Thank you very much.
maybe while we're waiting for the attendees to give some feedback, I don't know if Ngoni, if you would like to respond to how we can begin to address unequal power relations.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. That one is really a difficult one because most of us were caught unaware by the pandemic. So the pandemic actually changed the socio-economic status of many families, which actually worsened the situation on the ground. I remember our president here, President Ramaphosa, actually indicating that we now have an epidemic within a pandemic, which that was in July, June last year, which is quite a serious problem. So for us to address that, I think is to do with, for me, the issue of cash transfers, right? What the government is currently doing to close that gap. It might also work, but it's not easy. It's a process. We really need to continue engaging with our communities. By communities, I mean the families, our local leaders, to see how best we can stabilize, especially families, the married ones, the marriage institution, because if you look at the divorce rates, actually, they're actually going up because of those dynamics which are actually happening, especially if let me say, if the women is actually the one who has power in terms of the economic resources, you find that usually men, they don't tolerate that because of the belief that men are supposed to be the breadwinners. So it's a serious issue that we should continue engaging on to make sure that we stabilize our communities. It's a serious issue. Thanks, Edie. That's how I should respond to that.
Chair, I noted in the chat function there was another question. Let me just find it quickly.
There was I'm
Nomandla.
Okay.
Nomandla asked something there. How does one deal with the emotions that arise as a result of GBV? How does one deal with the emotions that arise as a result of the GBV?
Any of our panelists can take that question. How can one be supported to deal with the emotional and mental effects post the GBV?
Hi, Edith. Well, I would start with it's important for us to acknowledge that the scourge of GBV affects everyone. So it's important that as an individual, you accept that you are upset, you are angry with the fact that there's GBV happening. And if GBV has affected you personally, then it is important that you find psychological services to assist you in dealing with the experience that you had. I don't know if that answers Nomanda's question.
Yeah, if I can also come in for that one, Edith, I think PSS is quite critical. At individual, maybe family, as couples, I think it's quite important to have PSS for emotional kind of violence that we face in our communities. And also the spiritual, maybe the pastor will agree with me, the issue of spiritual counseling is quite important, especially if you face such problems as an individual or as couples. Thanks, Edith.
Okay, thank you for that. For the workplace partners, for dealing with that emotional and mental health aspect, we always encourage that as they come up with their programs for response, to consider partnership with other key stakeholders at local levels, and therefore link their response to other safety and security providers in the community. This may even be the police. There's also the medical, as well as psychosocial and psychological health support, as well as the legal and justice system. Because sometimes in the case of a rape, we may need more than just medical and counseling. The individual might actually get a closure if they would make a police report and seek justice beyond the workplace through the local justice system. So those are also other things that we say should be made available and be part of the referral pathway that we put forward and that we promote for the survivors. I don't know if there's any other comments in terms of.
I'd like to add to that as well. I see Mananga has added. Thank you. And also, it depends on where one is located. The access to the resources we've mentioned. Ngoni mentioned religion, said to psychological assistance, and information sharing, but also I think these emotions are best to, whereby people can speak about it. You need to find someone that you can speak to. So the importance of the family setup is critical in the sense that, or a friendship or a neighbor that you find someone that you can confine to and convey your your worries and your concerns, your emotions. So it's not because gender-based violence doesn't just affect your spirits, your soul. It affects your whole body. It affects your mind. It affects anyone around you, and anything that you touch, anything that you do. So it is very important that if you are located in places where such resources that you're speaking of are not existent, that you seek a neighbor, you seek a friend.
Okay, thank you for that. I have two comments here from Nomandla, which really speak to women's economic empowerment. And she says, I strongly believe that women, because we face more of a challenge for us, women should start acting on their talents, business ideas, and passions without bringing up that a man should provide. I'm not going to dwell on whether that narrative is wrong or right, and also eradicate the narrative that certain jobs are made for men. I am not condoning us to disrespect or undermine men, but I'm condoning the urge to want to have assets that we have worked for and to have bank balances that can assist us to facilitate our dreams, our dream lives that we fantasize about. And lastly, for those who would love to get married, to be able to contribute in financial, emotional, as well as mental stability. This means that should maybe divorce come about, you are able to move on without questioning your independence. Such stability also means that your children will not suffer in cases of retrenchments and so on. And she also goes on to propose that maybe organizations can also host events, seminars between the various ethnic groups, countries, that will educate individuals on differences existing between the races, countries, ethnic groups, and so on. And more campaigns can also be introduced. Thank you so much, Nomandla, for that comment. And with that, I would say it looks like we are out of time, but thank you so much all for your contributions. There are more, I think, comments in the chat box that
Yes.
we can continue to look at and review. And Leon says to Nomandla, please do get in touch. UNISA would be happy to collaborate with yourself as well as any other organizations who would like to look at how we can begin to address these in issues in our communities. I think with that, we come to the end of today's discussion, and that leaves us with one last final dialogue, which will be on the 4th of October, which is next week. And I hope you can all join us and invite others to also participate, where we now try to round up and conclude our discussions over the past 10 sessions, and find a way forward, as well as what it is and that we can do practical steps in terms of that are forward looking, in terms of what is it that we can begin to do in our various sectors to address both the sexual and non-sexual gender-based violence in our communities or in whatever spheres that we work. Thank you and good afternoon to all.
Thank you so much, Chair. From Golden Key, Southern Africa, we just want to say thank you, Edith, for being the MC for our session today, and all of our panelists and presenters. You are amazing. Attendees, you are so special to us. We really appreciate you walking with us and continuing on this journey. And as Edith said, our final webinar will be on Monday, 4 October. I already received a comment from Ann Jensen from Sweden asking, what's next? What will we do next? What do we do after this series? So all of the panelists will be and presenters will be on the session on Monday. We also have comments saying thank you for a great session. So we really appreciate it. I just want to also answer Ngoni. He spoke about the fact that we have to look at people in a holistic way. I agree. This is not just an emotional or a financial or economical problem or a physical problem. It's also a spiritual problem. And I think they also in the resources, Seto, I want to ask if you have any resources that you can share with the attendees, please do so in the chat function for us, any of the presenters. If you have resources that you want to direct the attendees to assist them in this, please do so. And then I just want to hand over to Leon. Leon, I'm going to ask you, Leon from UNISA, to end the session for us today. So thank you. Enjoy, everyone. Over to you, Leon.
Thank you, Janita, and thank you to everyone who contributed today, to our special speakers, Situ and Manika and Nkutula and Nguni, and also contributions by the MC Edith. I think you really brought it very nicely together and showing that we need each other. And at the end of the day, that's part of what we will engage with you on Monday, is what is next, what we hope to have a bit of a vision we want to share with you. And then we will say at the end, let the conversation go on, stay in contact with each other. And really, you know, let us just be each other's strength in this space. Because at the end of the day, each one of us is part of a big jigsaw puzzle that hopefully will one day resolve this problem and bring it to a level of no existence. And we can proudly also look back and say that is part of my legacy that I leave behind. I say thank you to everyone and all our faithful participants who come in here. And let's just really have a good afternoon. And over to you, Janita, to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. I would just like to also thank our collaborative partners for, starting this journey with us, and that would be UNISA, Father and Nation, Self AIDS, and Vitality Wellness. So to everyone, have a lovely day. We'll see you on Monday, and please have your comments and your questions ready for our session on Monday. We are going to engage with you. Have a lovely afternoon. You may now exit the session by clicking the leave button at the right bottom end of your screen. Goodbye.